Well, hi, everybody. It's Kim Winter here, Logistics Executive TV. Thanks for joining us on the Leaders in Business series. And today we have also an author, so we get a double banger. We get to talk about a book as well that's recently published. This gentleman is a great colleague of mine from the logistics and supply chain environment in Australia from up to 20 years ago. He has an extensive background in leadership, currently running a very successful executive coaching business. As I say, he's an author. He is very widely acknowledged in Australia, living in Melbourne. Welcome, Conor O'Malley. Hey, Conor, how are you doing?
Very well, Kim. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have a conversation with you and also for your listeners.
Brilliant. Well, good to see you, my friend. It's been quite some time since we spoke last, well and truly before COVID. And but as I've said, I've been following your career now for the best part of 2 decades. Conor, let's hear about the beginnings for you, because I think you're a native of offshore from Australia. So tell us about the upbringing. Tell us about how you ended up in Australia and how you got into the early stages of your career.
I will. Thanks, Kim. I describe myself as a Scot with an Irish name, an English accent, who's now an Australian. So there you go. There you have me culturally in one from my family perspective and how I see and feel myself with regards to my culture, if you like. Married to Paula, 2 grown-up children, and my passions are rugby union and golf. So on a personal side, there's me, hopefully in a bit of a nutshell. And professionally, as you know, came to Australia 2006 on the back of a change in the agricultural sector, but really a change in the retail sector when the 2 major retailers in Australia, Coles and Woolworths, let's say, arguably started to get their act together from a supply chain logistics perspective. And I, like many other people, came over here to hopefully bolster the supply chain logistics community and strengthen it as the retailers were getting their act together. So joined what became a $3.5 billion business company called National Foods in the food, dairy specifically, and juice business. And I've been here ever since. Journey actually with Coles, so with a retailer running their logistics, and also back to my heartland of third-party logistics, running Glen Cameron's business here in Australia, which was where I started my career in third-party logistics in the UK. So, but left that world 5 years ago, which maybe we'll talk more about through this conversation.
Absolutely. And it takes me back to those days when you and I used to catch up in coffees in the early 2000s. And I think you're actually a client of mine back in the day for the recruitment side of our business. And then potentially when we were starting up our executive coaching business. So who knows, maybe you can tell me that was part of the inspiration of you getting into coaching, which you've developed really well. So, Conor, great. So maybe you can start telling us a little bit about the executive coaching practice, because you have a coaching business with some degree of difference. And I'm very interested to hear about that and what problems you're trying to solve for your clients in the executive coaching.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kim. Well, let's start with the last part of your question. The problem that I'm seeking to solve is, I'll make it as a statement, is that leadership is changing. And I believe it's changing in 2 core areas within society today. One is leaders must now be more leaders of and in society, as well as of their business and their team. If we look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, and we'll talk about trust later on, that the highest regarded body or institution of which business in this context is, 61% are leaders of business, far higher than government, far higher than media, far higher than even NGOs. So there is an expectation that leaders must be leaders in society as well as of their business. That means that there's a different requirement for leaders, in my view, and different attributes that are required to be leaders in society as well as leaders of business. And then the second one is the style of leadership is changing as we have, a more, and I'll use the hackneyed words of complex and ambiguous, world, a faster paced world, more information. We know about that, but what I also feel strongly is that the style of leadership is changing as more millennials come through. They're looking for a different style of leadership, as are more empowered women in leadership, in business. They're looking for a different style, and thank goodness for that. And also minority groups who are looking to be empowered also need a different style of leadership, which I believe is one that comes more from within, where there is more empathy, more curiosity, more listening skills are really dialed up. Now, that's not to say that we don't still need the skills of vision, of direction, of decision-making, and more technical skills of strategy and aligning a business to a particular purpose and vision. They always were required, they still are. However, the how of leadership is changing. So in my coaching practice, I seek to support leaders become more effective leaders of self, of their team, of their business, and in society. So that's the problem I'm seeking to solve, and that's how I do it. Okay. I'm very happy to talk more about more detail in terms of the how, but at a headline level, I hope that answers your question.
Sure. No, it certainly does. And you and I, as I mentioned, have been members of the executive coaching community, both in Australia, and I know we both have clients, obviously, offshore as well for multinationals. But you have a particular bent in the last few years, and we will come to the book you published recently in a moment, but you have a particular bent around the standards of qualification and ability, formal qualifications in the area of executive coaching. Because as both you and I know, the bar of entry into executive coaching can be somewhat lower than what we'd possibly like. So talk to us perhaps about your angle there.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Kim. And yeah, as you know, as a graduate of the IECL here in Australia, one of the a strongly regarded executive coaching training organisation. I'll say I firmly believe, and for anybody listening to this and who is looking to procure a coaching service, either for their organisation or for themselves, I'm going to flip what typically procurers see on its head. So typically procurers, and rightly so, will say, is there a fit for me or for the person who's looking to be coached? Is there a strong understanding and a cultural alignment with the business and the strategy of the organization? Is there clarity of what the person who's being coached is looking to achieve through a coaching program? Is there good value, return on investment? All absolutely fundamental, and I'm not shying away from those. However, what is typically at the moment, I would say the icing on the cake is, and I wonder if the coach is credentialed by one of the global credentialing bodies, or I wonder if the coach is certified by an accredited training school. Now, for me, I'm going to flip this around and say that should be the foundation. Yep. That because the bar to entry is so low, in fact, there is no bar. There's not even one to step over. Anybody can turn around and say that they're a coach. Yep. And I'll draw a distinction, which I will in a minute, between coaching and mentoring. However, I strongly believe to be an effective coach, as well as being able to respond to those questions and areas of procurement that are absolutely vital, the coach should be certified through an accredited training body. In other words, the procurer should say, tell me about your philosophy of coaching. Tell me about what it is that you're going to bring. What study have you done? What learning have you done? And then over and above that, which is not a necessity, but I believe that it's an important next step for any coach, is, are you credentialed? So have you gone through a further process of credentialing by one of the global coaching bodies, for example, the International Coaching Federation, where you have to prove coach ethics, you have to be mentored, you have to be supervised, you have to have a specific number of hours working at a particular level with references and referees that will validate your coaching over those journeys. That, I believe, should be the base case for anybody working as an executive coach. And then all of the current areas of procurement requirements absolutely should then be met.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I have to agree with you. I must say, out of the many clients that we've engaged with over the years, as you know, I've qualified also with the IECL, and I consider them an absolute global standard in Australia and in Asia. Yep. But very seldom do organisations ask us to provide credentials or even case studies or references from previous clients. What we do is to cover that off in our own minds, though, is we do offer referees and CEOs of various global organisations to go, listen, if you're interested to hear a little bit about our style of coaching and the sort of benchmarks that we have, and how you're looking to get an ROI, go and talk to this or that person there.
Yeah. As do I, and as I think any coach should. And if I may, Kim, I made a distinction, so I think it's for our listeners or your listeners to perhaps understand this. I think it's important is the distinction between mentoring and coaching.
Yes.
And at a very headline level, a mentor for me is somebody who's walked in the shoes of the mentee. It's a right to provide advice. It's a right to share stories, share your wisdom. Now, that mentor must be curious. That mentor must have a learning way of being. People might say a learning mindset to co-create an outcome. However, the mentor tacitly has the right, if you like, through that person's experience and wisdom to share stories and give insights and advice. Yeah. Executive coaching is much more about ask. It's not about advice giving. It's about the ability to ask very searching, at times challenging questions of the person who you're coaching, such that that person comes to their own outcome, their own decision. They see the possibilities themselves. That's the skill. That's the art of coaching. Being truly present, being able to ask questions, being curious, and being an amazing listener, such that you can be present for the person you're coaching. Yeah, that's a distinction I would like to make between coaching and mentoring. And as a mentor, what's the barrier to entry there? Well, it is your wisdom. It is your experience. It is an assessment by a person that you've walked in their shoes and you can support them. Sure. As it is for a coach, however, it is also credentialing and a certification in standards. And my coaching is through the Newfield Institute, because you said I have a different approach. So you mentioned with yourself the IECL. For myself, it's through an organization called the Newfield Institute, which focuses specifically on ontological coaching. Yeah. And at a very headline level, that's a different philosophy of coaching that I bring to my clients. And at a headline level, it's supporting a client understand their way of being, which means their stories, what they tell themselves. And I also work in energy and moods and actually physiology and somatics, which, does take quite a degree of training. And then the other shift, if you like, is then to, well, what is your way of doing as a leader? So what are your behaviors? What do people observe in your behaviors? And what's the language that you use, and how effective are you in using language to get stuff done, in using language to build relationships, in using language that others will choose to follow you through your language? And then the third element of your way of doing is actually the action that you take, which very much is not only the what action you take, it's how you take that action, okay, which typically is through your behaviors. So that's the philosophy of coaching I bring to the world.
And that's, to clarify, that's ontological.
Ontology.
Okay.
And ontology is the philosophy of our way of being, which came through a chap called Fernando Flores in the late 1970s, 1980s, who actually, as a matter of trivial pursuit interest, was incarcerated in Chile in the Pinochet regime, and through him doing a lot of reading, brought this particular philosophy of coaching to the world, life, and therefore coaching to the world.
Okay. And as a matter of interest, you've opened a little bit of a Pandora's box here. So, but about the different nuances and the different levels of coaching. And this is what I think it's important that while we're talking to you, the audience can understand that executive coaching is not just one size fits all. There are just so many different streams. And back to your point, it's so important to understand exactly what the client's trying to achieve. And to that point, can I ask you, what is it that typically, and you won't be able to have an all-encompassing answer to this, I'm sure, but what would be the main trends of when a corporate comes to you and says, Conor, we've got somebody in our business, or somebody themselves comes to you and says, I want some coaching in this particular area. Are they typically the senior performers, the top performers in organisation that themselves or the company want to do better and expand their horizons, or is it others in the organisation that perhaps are not doing so well, that the company believes in investing in them, that wants to bring them up to a certain capability or investment return for the company? Where's the main trend in that?
Great. I was really interesting. So I'll go at headline level. Main trend is that organizations are opening more, coaching up to more levels within their organization. And that isn't necessarily what one would call executive coaching. So that's not about performance per se. And it's interestingly now starting to, I'm not going to go here in detail, but it's starting to challenge what is learning and development. It's starting to challenge workshops. It's starting to challenge that team learning and development area by organizations starting to give more and more people coaching. Now, that's very new in coaching, and it's yet to really transpire exactly how that's going to fall out. So that's one answer. At the executive level and on a personal basis, what I would say is probably two or three areas. So one at a very senior level. So worked with a CEO recently, and actually still, who there is work in the domain of purpose. What is my purpose, and how am I bringing my purpose to the organization that I'm actually leading and running? And there's a link of that to this notion of being a leader in society. So at a C-suite level, at a CEO level, that's certainly one answer. Then another area is where leaders of functions may have been brought recently onto an executive team. So this shift from being a functional leader to being an enterprise leader, and the suite of skills then that have to be much broader, that as you leave some of those more technical leadership skills, you have to, and I think both of us would agree with that, broaden your horizon of leadership skills to be a more effective influencer of others, your peers especially, to be a more effective communicator and to represent the whole organization as opposed to purely your function. Okay. And then the third area is around specific skill sets. So I can think of one person at the moment where there is a degree of self-confidence, actually, in terms of, not from a technical perspective, but actually presenting and presenting that person, you might say, executive presence. There's another person who working with, which is not being the doer. So incredibly good at the particular role, but actually more effective delegation, more effective leadership of team, more effective entrusting of others. So there's a whole host of areas. And there is, you alluded to what I would call performance coaching. There is an element of performance coaching that coaches do. I have to say I choose not to do that space, to work in that space. Mine is a more transformative personal journey for a C-suite leader or an aspiring C-suite leader, where the organization says that person is a high performer and we want them to be on the C-suite.
Sure. Well, Conor, as you know, at the top of the show, I wanted to get a book review from you today, but I'll tell you what, we've got so much information from you today, which I think is really valuable certainly to me and to the audience, I hope, that we're going to have a separate interview around the book. In the background there, Trust, which you published recently to great acclaim. So I'm going to have a separate interview on that. But to finish up on today, what I'd like to do is just always ask our guests if they've got one tip about what you're doing or the successes you've had that you can share with our audience just to round out the show. What would it be?
Well, my tip from a personal perspective is to be a learner. And continue to be a learner. And if we talk about that from a coaching perspective, I would ask any procurer of coaching to ask a coach, how have you learned? and prove that to me from a credentialing and or certification basis. And if there's any coach listening to this, it's the flip side. If you are aspiring to be a coach, you have to be a great learner. And I strongly urge you to ensure that you become credentialed and certified in a particular philosophy of coaching.
Excellent. Hey, Conor, really appreciate what you've been sharing today. Some excellent insights. So good to catch up with you after so many years.
Indeed. Thank you.
Congratulations on your recently elected government, which has just changed hands in Australia. Can't wait to get back down to Melbourne to see you. I'll be down there in the next few months. And we'll sign out today, but I'm definitely looking forward to coming back to you with the interview about Trust, your new book. Conor O'Malley, the founder of the CEO's Caddy, executive coach and entrepreneur. Thanks so much for joining us, and look forward to catching up with you on the book review.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Kim. Absolute pleasure.